everyone, it's JEN-nuh-nee and welcome back to my channel, The Story Ain't Over. So today I'm coming to you with a favorites video, and it's been a long time since I've done one of these. The last couple that I did were my all-time favorite YA series and my all-time favorite YA standalones. So I will link those down below because a lot of you seem to like those videos and people continue to go back to them, and I do think that they're a good sense of my taste in books, but I do feel like my kind of favorites have changed since those videos, and I did make those like a couple of years ago, so I wanted to kind of update them, but this time I'm going to go with more of a genre approach for these favorites videos. So today's video is my top 10 favorite YA fantasies. So for those of you who have been following my channel for a while, you know fantasy is like one of my favorite genres. It's like all I can talk about half the time, and most of my favorite books like ever are fantasies because a lot of those are the ones that I read while I was growing up, or like when I was an actual teen, or are ones that I found recently that really impacted me in some way. So fantasy holds like a really special place in my heart. I always just go to fantasy books to like escape, and that's kind of what I want from my fantasy books. So all these are YA ones because, as you guys know, I read mostly YA, but if I end up, picking up more adult fantasies, then I will definitely do a adult fantasies favorites video. But until then, we have this one. So I will stop talking and I will jump into my favorite books. So I'm gonna mention the only standalone on this video first, because this is a very recent favorite of mine, and it's no surprise because it's by an author that I absolutely love, and that is The Kingdom of Back by Marie Lu. So for those of you who don't know, Marie Lu is the author of the Legend series, of Warcross, of the Young Elites trilogy as well, and she's just one of my favorite authors, and I've always loved her stuff. But the interesting thing about this book is that it's actually the first book that she wrote and intended to publish, and it was the one that she got her agent with, but the book never sold, and so she ended up writing Legend, and then that's the book that she debuted with. But she ended up coming back to the story and kind of reworking it and finally publishing it, which I thought was just so cool. But basically this is kind of a fantastical take on kind of a historical figure, which is Mozart, and his sister Nannerl. So this is the kind of untold story of Nannerl, Mozart's sister, and she's also a musician, and she has always loved music, and she has always composed and that kind of thing, and her brother was like this child prodigy, but so was she kind of. And so this book kind of follows Nannerl's journey and like her kind of growing up with her brother and being in his shadow. But in the middle of all of that, there's these stories that Nannerl and her brother kind of make up about the Kingdom of Back, and they tell these stories as they're traveling and all of that, and those stories kind of start to come to life. And in this book, Marie Lu begs the question, like, what if that world was real? Because those were actually stories that the real Mozart and Nannerl were telling each other. So Marie Lu kind of stumbled upon this fact and wanted to write a book about it, and I thought it was just so cool. And the whole world of the Kingdom of Back is just so interesting and so magical and like dreamy, and there are some terrible characters, and there are also some really good ones, and it was just super interesting. And overall I just felt like this was like a work of art in general, just like the entire book. So that's why it's one of my favorites. It's just so kind of literary, which is something that I really loved, and I just really enjoyed it, so I highly recommend. So I feel like I'm kind of going from my favorites to my least favorites kind of order, but like it's not a hard and fast rule. I don't like specifically like a specific one over the other, but this next one is like high top tier. This is like god tier. If you've seen my tier ranking YA fantasies, you might know what book this is, but that is Strange the Dreamer by Laini Taylor. This whole duology gives me life. This was a fantasy that just blew me away. Like, I had known nothing about it. I had heard people like this book. I know Chloe from Books with Chloe loved this book, and I just never knew what it was about, basically. And so I went into it super blind. I kind of picked it up from the library, I think, on ebook, and just started reading, and it was the most magical experience I have like ever had reading a book, in the sense that this book is told so beautifully and lyrically, and it is also more on the literary side, which is probably why I really enjoyed it as a fantasy. But this kind of feels like Atlantis: The Lost Empire. If you've ever seen that movie, the main character is very similar to Milo, and also just kind of the situation that he's in. But it was just so enchanting, and I remember just ripping through the pages and wanting to know what happens next. Even though it's not like a fast-paced book, it is like very much a kind of slower paced one, but you are getting to know so many characters, and they all have such rich backstories to them and such complex emotions and things that are going on. But basically, if you don't know, this book follows our main character Laszlo Strange, who is kind of this orphan who has grown up in these libraries with monks and all of that, and he's always grown up on these stories of this lost city called Weep. And Weep isn't actually its real name. It had a different name, but the name was stolen away by a curse, and so now Weep is all that's left. And so Laszlo's always kind of of read stories about this lost city and wanted to know more about it. And so the book kind of jumps to when he's grown up, and a delegation from that city comes to his town, and they're looking for different experts to help them with a problem in their city. And so Laszlo obviously jumps on this chance and goes off with the delegation and heads to the lost city of Weep. And there's so much more to this, and like, I don't want to give anything away because I definitely feel like this is a book that you need to just jump into without knowing anything, and you will absolutely love it. And one of the things that I really love about this book is that the magical powers in this series are just so specific to each character. No one has like the same kind of ability, and it really plays into who that character is. And I also just love the way that the world of this book is constructed and kind of the power dynamics. And once you get to the parts in Weep, you are starting to learn so many things, and it was just kind of mind-blowing. There are like gods and magical babies and like things floating in the sky and just so many secrets that are kind of going around, and it's an incredible book and I cannot recommend it enough. Like, it's just so amazing. All right, the next series slash book that I want to recommend, and which is one of my favorites, is the Ember Quartet by Sabaa Tahir. So this is the first book, An Ember in the Ashes, and as you can see, I've like tabbed all the sides of this because I recently reread this for a video that I did in partnership with Penguin Teen, and I talked about my 47 thoughts while rereading this book because it is one of my all-time favorites, and it just warms my heart in so many ways because I love these characters. And this is a series that I found a couple years ago that I had no idea existed, and I had no idea that there was like this series with like brown kids on the cover and had this like South Asian rep, and I was just so excited by that. I remember picking it up and then just actually falling in love with the characters and the story and how wonderfully crafted it is. This is a series that is like really hard hitting. It has some really dark moments, really sad moments, but it also has characters who are trying their best and, you know, fighting against so many odds and still trying to be triumphant at the end. And these are characters who go through so much character growth as well, and, you know, so many hardships, but you are seeing them, you know, get back up again every time. It also has really complex characters as well. There are villains in this series who you want to hate, but then you learn things about them and you realize that they're way more complicated than, you know, you think they are, and they're so three-dimensional. Like, there's not a character in this book who is 2D, which is just amazing. But yes, I love this. There's such a rich backstory to the world as well, and like there's magic in it as well. And we have two main characters and then kind of a third when you get to the second one, and we get POV chapters from them all. I really love Laya as a main character. She is like someone who starts off thinking she's very weak and is trying her best to become strong and fight for the people that she loves. And then we have Elias, who kind of just wants to run away from his duty and who he is, and the fact that he comes from a nation of armed and very dangerous and very horrible people. And so it's these two characters kind of trying to run away from who they are and then finding themselves again. And I love, love, love this series. All right, the next series slash book that I want to talk about is the Six of Crows duology by Leigh Bardugo. There are no surprises here that I'm mentioning this book slash series. So many people love this series on BookTube, and I am also one of them. And this was honestly something that I read when I really, really needed it, and I was so happy about that. I remember I went to the signing for this book that Leigh Bardugo did in Toronto, and it was like one of the best experiences that I had at a book signing. But basically, this is a series that kind of takes place after the Grisha trilogy, but it is like kind of completely separate from it, and it follows these 6 different people from like different walks of life kind of coming together to pull off this heist. And it's kind of a magical heist because they're trying to steal this kind of magical drug that is creating some very bad and powerful people. I love the series mainly because of the characters, like getting to know each of them, getting to know their backstories, seeing how they interact with each other, and then seeing them with all of the angst come together and like all of their baggage come together and have to work together. Like, I think that's the best part. There's a bunch of characters and like couples in this series, and they are learning to be with each other and get what they want. And there's just so much angst, which I love, but I also just love like how cutthroat some of these characters are, especially Kaz, as we know. He's a straight up criminal, but he has a like really sad backstory too. And we also have Inej, who is my favorite character of all time in any series of any book. She is like the character that I always come back to because she is just so strong. She's like the pillar amongst the group, and she holds everyone together, and I think I love that about her. And she was also one of the first characters that I saw in a fantasy book who was South Asian, which I just loved. So yes, overall, love this series. I think it's just like both like absolutely fun, really great dialogue, but also just really amazing characters coming together, and I think that was one of the fun things about it. And by the end of the book, you just care for them all so much that you like need to know what happens. Okay, so the next series that I want to talk about is very similar to the Six of Crows series because it's in the same world, and that is the Shadow and Bone trilogy by Leigh Bardugo. So I know a lot of people who do not like this series, but I am not one of those people. I love this series. It brings me so much joy, and it was also something that was like very close to my heart. I read it when I was a teen, like I read it in high school, and I remember ripping through each of the books and just enjoying the story so much and really wanting to know what happens. But I also really connected to the main character, Alina. She is not a happy-go-lucky main character. She is not always strong. She doesn't always know what she's doing, and I think I loved that aspect of her, where she was kind of prickly, where she fell for the tricks, where she didn't know what she was doing all the time. And I think it was very realistic for a young girl at that age, and I really connected with that. And so in this book, we're in Ravka, one of the nations in the Grisha universe, and we're following Alina, and she is one of these soldiers in like the army of Ravka, and she has always had this crush on her best friend Mal, and the two of them have always been together since like they were young. But in this world, there are people called Grisha who have these like magical abilities, and there's one part of Ravka which is called the Shadowfold, which is like this stretch of darkness basically within the country, and it cuts off the east and west side of the country. So her section of the army is kind of tasked with taking some stuff across the fold, and when that happens, the leader of the Grisha army, the Darkling, joins, and he has the power to control darkness, and so he joins and they go across this fold, and Alina shows these like magical powers that she never knew she had before, and so she's kind of whisked away to become a Grisha, even though usually Grisha are tested when they're children and then they are trained as these Grisha soldiers, but for some reason she missed the original test, and so here she is now. But this is a story that like you think it's gonna go one way, but it goes a completely different direction, and I think that was one of the really cool things about it. I love that it wasn't like so straight and narrow, and I loved how complex the villain in this book is. I don't want to spoil anything for someone who hasn't read this, and I know a lot of people have already read this, so they kind of know, but the villain in this is really amazing and very kind of layered. And I also just love the progression of this series. Like by the end, I really cared for these characters and I really wanted them to succeed. And there are a lot of like minor characters. There's one like minor major character who shows up in the second book who I absolutely love, who is Nikolai, and he has his own series now. But yeah, overall I just really enjoyed this. I think like the main thing for me was that I really connected to the main character Alina, and I love the way that the book was kind of crafted with some of the reveals. And I also just love the concept of the Grisha and what they can control, and also how well Leigh Bardugo crafted the magic and how intricate it is and how it's kind of a science. Alright, the next book slash series that I want to talk about is the Graceling books. So they're called the Graceling Realm series or books. And this is the first one, but all of the books are kind of companions to each other. And I think I love this one and also the second one, Fire, the most. But in general, I love these books and the world that they're set in. It's kind of like an old school fantasy. And the really cool thing about this book is that there are certain people in this world who are called Gracelings who have graces, which are like these magical powers. And so a grace can be like something super specific, like giving someone dreams or being really strong in combat or something like that. So it makes for some really interesting magical powers. And so our main character, Katsa, is kind of an assassin for the king. She is his kind of mercenary because her grace is killing, and she's really good at it, and since she was a young child, this is what she's been doing. But when a prince from a neighboring kingdom visits her kingdom, and he has the ability for combat skills, and the two of them start to get close, she starts to kind of change her worldview because she's starting to realize that the things that she believed about herself might not necessarily be true. And there's a lot that kind of goes on in this book, but like I don't want to reveal anything, and I feel like it's just one of those books that you kind of need to experience. I also feel like this book is a little bit more on the literary side, which is why I love it so much and still to this day love it so much. It has not ever lost its luster for me, and I also just really love the romance in this book. Like it just hit me in the feels and I loved it. And it's the same thing with the next book, Fire. It's like two different characters that you're following, but like the romance is still amazing. And then another aspect of these books is the villains in them, which are just so cool and so interesting, and they just kind of blew me away because one of the villains kind of crosses over into both books, even though they're kind of set in different timelines. But the way that the villain is kind of constructed is just really cool, and like the power that they have is really cool. So yeah, it's kind of one of those books that you just need to read and experience, and I don't want to reveal too much, but highly recommend. This is a pretty old YA book. Like I think it came out like 10 years ago or something, so it's definitely an old favorite, but I love it. I read it in high school and it just blew me away, and I have reread it since then and still loved it the second time. So yeah. Alright, the next book slash series that I want to talk about is the Gilded Wolves series by Roshni Chokshi. This is the first book. The second book, The Silver Serpents, just came out and I have not read it yet, but I'm including this on this list because I still absolutely love this book like so much. And it's really funny to me because I know a lot of people who don't like this book or went into it with expectations that weren't really right for it. You know, a lot of people assumed it to be like just like Six of Crows because it's a heist book as well, but it's not. It has so many more layers to it, and because it's written by a woman of color, like there's so many more nuances to it, I think, that she was able to bring. And this is a book set in Paris, and it follows like a larger cast of characters who are kind of coming together to try and steal this artifact that holds kind of immense power. And in this world, there's kind of like this magic system that relies on artifacts and things that kind of belong to a culture having been imbued with power. And so our main characters all have some sort of backstory and kind of thing to them where they have had something stolen from them, or the effects of colonization have kind of affected them in a really strong way. And this is set in the 1800s, so it does have a historical aspect to it. And you are seeing how like colonization specifically has like deeply affected the world and these people, because most of the characters are people of color or, you know, marginalized in some way, which I thought was just so interesting and made for a really powerful story. And so seeing them come together, it's just magnificent. I really connected to all of the characters in a really strong way, and I absolutely love the two main characters, Severin and Lila. They just hold every corner of my heart and I want the best for them. But regardless, like this book has some really interesting twists as well and some really interesting history as well. And if you're like a secret fan of like National Treasure, you will love this book. Not gonna lie, love National Treasure. So this was like a huge treat for me. It was just so much fun. I love the history in it, and I'm also a history major if you didn't know that, so that was also really enjoyable. But overall, I think it's just the characters that did it for me and what they're fighting for, I think. And I'm so interested to see where this goes in the second book, so I cannot wait for that. And I've heard reviews where like people said the second book is even better, and I just can't wait. So highly recommend, like if you were looking for a diverse fantasy, like this is definitely one, but also just like a fantasy, like this is just so well done, I think. All right, the next series slash book that I want to talk about is by one of my favorite authors, and that is Victoria Schwab, and this is This Savage Song. And the second book is called Our Dark Duet, and this is kind of more of a paranormal-ish, more urban fantasy type fantasy, and I absolutely love it like so much. I was so excited about this when I first heard about like the concept of it, and I think the way that Victoria Schwab pitched it was like Romeo and Juliet minus romance plus monsters and magic, and I think that that was just like all I really needed to pick this up, and it definitely is that exact pitch. And this is set in kind of a like near future version of our world where violence has created these monsters. So every time a human commits an act of violence, these monsters kind of spring from that act. And so depending on the level of violence, you get a different kind of monster and a different strength of monster. And so the highest strength is like the Sudai, who can steal souls. The middle is Malachi, who can steal your blood or drink your blood. And then the like bottom one is Corsai, who kind of eat flesh. So this series follows two main characters, Kate Harker, who is this young girl who is like the daughter of like this big kind of criminal boss in one of the like bigger cities called Verity, and she has always wanted to be a monster hunter. She has always wanted to be ruthless like her father, and that's kind of the vibe that she's trying to channel. And then our other main character is August Flynn, who is actually a monster but doesn't want to be one, and he is one of these Sunai, and he was kind of spontaneously born from one of these violent acts, but he's never wanted to be a monster. He's actually very kind at heart, but he has this ability to kind of like play his violin and magic people into following his will, and then he steals their souls if they are someone who has committed a crime. And so it's these two characters who are totally different people who want the opposite thing. Like Kate wants to be monstrous, and August is a monster who just wants to be left alone and be good and just doesn't want to give into his monstrous side. And this is a story of when these two people end up in a situation together, and the pace of this book is just really fun and exciting. It's definitely more on the spooky side. I was like definitely more scared at some points, but I absolutely loved it. Like it was so good, and I love the magic in it. So yeah, highly recommend, especially if you're looking for a book without a romance. I definitely think that this is a good one for that. All right, we're on to our second last series slash book, and that is the Winners Trilogy by Marie Rukowski. I love this series, and this is actually a fantasy that doesn't really have magic in it. It's just kind of a fantasy world, and it's one of the reasons why I actually really love this, because it's so focused on the political aspects and the power dynamics that are going on within this book that make it so interesting, and somehow your interest is held so well. But basically it follows this young girl who is from this like kingdom who has taken over this other one, so I think it's Valoria has taken over Haran, and so she's from Valoria, she's a Valorian, and so she's the daughter of like the most powerful general of the Valorian army, and so she has like a high status, but she also has like a lot of limitations as a girl in high society. She has to either choose to become a soldier or get married, but she doesn't really like fighting, but she is more of like a strategic person and really thinks that she could be good with like battle strategy and all of that, but she's not allowed to do that. The book actually opens up with Kestrel, the main character, going to this auction for slaves from Haran, and she goes to this auction and experiences this thing called the winner's curse. It's where you pay a lot more for something than you originally intended, than that thing is worth, because of like the auction kind of just driving the price up, and so you end up winning and getting that thing that you wanted, but you end up paying a lot for it. And I think that is kind of a metaphor for the entire book, because she wins the slave, but he is actually secretly a spy for the Haran people, and they're trying to take down the Valorian occupying army and get rid of the general. And this is a book that kind of takes something that might be slightly problematic with the whole slaves thing, but actually does it in a really tasteful and really well done way, because you are seeing some like power dynamics kind of flip, because Kestrel doesn't know what she's getting into, and I think that is one of the really interesting things about it. But it also has this really cool romance in it as well. I loved it because of the way that the power dynamics of the story go. It complicates their relationship, and I think that was really cool. And overall, this is just a really well done series. It has 3 books, and it kind of expands as the conflict grows, and it takes the story to different locations in the world as well. Alright, and the last and final series slash book that I want to talk about is the Cruel Prince series, or the Folk of the Air series by Holly Black. So this is a really popular one. I know a lot of people either love this book or hate to love this book, but I'm one of those people who like mostly loves it. I'm mentioning this one at the end because it's not my like ultimate favorite, but it is one of my favorites. Like, I did really enjoy this series and had a lot of fun with it. It's one of those series where I thought I really wouldn't like it. I went into it, started the first couple chapters and wasn't really enjoying it, but as I started reading more, there's one point where I just kind of flipped a switch and I started enjoying it so much more. And I read this on ebook originally, and then I ended up getting the physical books, but I ripped through the first 2 books and then got the 3rd one when it came out, and honestly I just really enjoyed it. I think it's a really fun series, and it has some really hilarious and complex characters, and I mainly loved our main character Jude, who is so cutthroat and badass, but she's also someone trying her hardest to survive in a world that really doesn't want her there. So basically in this series, the fairy world is kind of adjacent to our own, and you can kind of travel to it. So our main character has an older sister and a twin, I think, and basically her mother was in love with a fairy and was originally with him, but then she ends up leaving him and marrying someone else and having these 3 kids. And so that original guy that she was with comes back and murders her and her husband, and so the main character is left without parents, and so that original fairy takes Jude and her sisters back to fairy and raises them as his children. So she's grown up in fairy as a human and has faced the derision of these fairies and, you know, their manipulation and all that and their magic, and has always wanted to fight back. She's always felt powerless. And so she gets this opportunity to kind of become a spy for one of the fairy princes and get her revenge, kind of, but also gain the power that she's always wanted. And then you are seeing her kind of rise up in the ranks, and it's really quite interesting. And I just love her motivation and just the way that she was throughout the book. I think she was a very cool character. But yeah, overall, love this series. Thought it was a really enjoyable time. Like, I think this is definitely one that I go back to as like just a fun and interesting read, and also one that had like some really crazy and amazing twists, mainly because of the whole theory of like fairies being kind of cutthroat and volatile, and so it made for some really interesting things that happen in this series, and I really love that. Alright, but those are all the books that I wanted to talk about today. I rambled on and on about all of my favorites, but honestly, like, I can't help it when I'm talking about my favorites. It's just like, I can't just tell you what it's about. I need to tell you all of the reasons why it is amazing. And I think every time I talk about any one of these books, I end up saying something different because I start to remember different things and other things that I want you to kind of know about it, so I can convince you to pick it up. So I really, really hope that you guys found something that you want to read. A lot of these I've mentioned in other videos, but hopefully you found a new one. And overall, I just love these books and I hold them very dear to my heart, and they're all books that I can always see myself going back to and rereading and loving again and finding comfort in, which I really, really love. So yeah, I would love to hear from you guys what your top 10 favorite YA fantasies are, or just fantasies in general. I always love getting recommendations from you guys, so leave those down below. And let me know if there's like a book on this video that you absolutely hated. Like, I'd be interested to see which of my faves like no one else likes. But thank you so much for watching. I will see you in my next video, and please remember that the story ain't over. Bye!